Our next speaker is Zhun, who teaches economics at John Jay College. His recent book, From Commune to Capitalism, How China's Peasants Lost Collective Farming and Gained Urban Poverty, was published by Monthly Review Press.
Thank you, Michelle, and really appreciate for the opportunity to speak here, to participate. I believe for many of you, including myself, since pandemic, it's very depressing in general. But I think seeing the emergence of Child Collective is definitely, brightens the day for me and for many. Really appreciate all the work, important work, great work that Child Collective and also People's Forum have been doing all of the years. I grew up in China. I now work in New York just for the moment, and I agree with most of the views that were shared by the speakers before me. And but as someone who has been a part of the leftist movement struggles in China, I would probably be a little bit more critical on the Chinese experience. And today I want to talk about China as a challenge to capitalism. If we look at the mainstream media and some other media, and you see that China is often perceived as an important player in world capitalism. Regardless of what Chinese government or China portrays itself as, its Chinese characteristics, some certain kind of socialism, etc. But it's an important player, and indeed, I think the collaboration between the Chinese elites and the ruling classes in the United States and the West in general have been some part of the founding blocks of the contemporary capitalist order, and we know that. And some people like this and hope that the U.S. and China would be wise enough so that they can, preserve that relationship. Just don't disrupt. And some other people don't like it. They think that they don't like China's particular role in world capitalism. There are many possible reasons. For example, some people think that capitalism deserves better, something better. And some other fear that China is too dangerous, too untamed for the purpose of developing capitalism. And here, I think those views, either appraising or more critical, they focus on China as a friend and sometimes even a savior of capitalism. But I think there is I think this is an important part that we can overlook that China as a potential challenge to capitalism. So how can we see China as a challenge to capitalism? It's because yes, all the trade, all the great investment that China is doing, it in itself is not necessarily against capitalism. It can be promoting some important necessary industrialization, etc. But it's not sufficient in my mind. I think that we should understand that China started its reintegration to the world capitalism starting from the late 1970s after Chairman Mao passed away. And we know that reintegration of the former Soviet Union and China, among others, greatly extended the lifeline of capitalism. But unlike in the Soviet Union, Chinese elites, they chose to develop market relationship, there's a certain type of capitalism in a more cautious way, a gradualist fashion, which enabled continuous and rapid capital accumulation and economic growth over the past 4 decades. So this sustained accumulation brought huge amount of wealth to a new capitalist class. And on the other hand, as I argued before, the rural workers, the peasants, the communes, the collectives, and the urban workers, millions of people, lost a lifetime employment, all the social benefits. And the market forces have in general impoverished, like anywhere else, impoverished all the working people. People suffer from the rising cost of education, housing, and healthcare. Despite all the efforts that fight extreme poverty and others from the state. And not to mention the corruption, the mafia, and all the environmental damages. Those are all true. Yet, I would like to argue that capitalism has not secured its rule in China. And China remains a big unfinished project for capitalism itself. Because of the reform was done in a gradual way, not in Russia, which is sort of like a one-time deal. Chinese states, the whole legitimacy is still based on Marxism and revolution and all the legacies that other speakers have talked about. So that creates a challenge to them. Let me quote from an old Chinese classics. Confucius, or Kongzi, as we said, that he once said that if names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things. And if language be not in accordance with the truth of things, affairs cannot be carried on to success. It means something. As long as the Chinese elites have not got rid of let's say, the Chinese Communist Party or all the legacies, the legitimacy of capitalism can only be partially established in China. Because all the people still, they believe, or they thought they believed that the whole project, the national project in China, is to build socialism. If you say something different, it will create some huge chaos. This was, this partial establishment of legitimacy of capitalism is okay for 10 years, 20 years, maybe 30 years. But in the long run, it's going to create some problem, huge problem for capitalists. And the Chinese Communist Party cannot simply abandon its past, despite possible intentions. And then Marxism, until this day, remains the core curriculum in all the schools. And you have to learn it. It's mandatory training. And although it's often in vulgarized versions, it's people. I think that the thousands of scholars have tried to modify Marxism so that it fits the reality. It's like so that we are doing great. But rhetoric has consequences. We know that. And generations of students learn Marxism from school and at an early age. And we know from experience, it's practically impossible to fully reconcile Marxism, even a vulgarized version, with the realities of capitalism. It's not easy to do. And the conflict between rhetoric and realities, they can and they do radicalize the working people. China has the largest working class in the world. And the continued social class conflicts, they educate the working class politically, economically. In terms of consciousness, class consciousness, many people, if you talk to people in China in the 1980s, for example, you would find that many of them believe that capitalism might be a way out. That to them, capitalism is something the same with wealth and leisure. That's something that they saw from the U.S. movies, from the soap operas that they saw on TV, which I think created a lot of unrealistic expectation for them in the 80s or in the 90s. But things can change once they actually get to see what capitalism looks like. When they actually work in a capitalist factory, when they work under a capitalist boss, they know, well, okay, that's different, right? There is wealth and leisure, but it's only reserved for a very small group of people, right? And in general, working people will suffer. Once you gain that consciousness, you look at capitalism, look at yourself look at China in a different way, I mean, for the Chinese working people. And this was basically how the contemporary Chinese left started to emerge in the 1990s. There was virtually no left in China in the 80s. It was a different time, but it started to emerge after the transition. The specter of socialism and communism, and more straightforwardly, the specter of Mao is increasingly visible in China. And while the socialist societies in the 20th century, as Chairman Mao once said, they tend to create capitalist rulers, elites who think that capitalism gave them more benefits, more wealth than socialism. So they have a tendency, they have the incentive to move to capitalism. But the particular China model that we see nowadays, the Chinese socialist society, it continuously produces new Marxists. I think it's definitely unique in that way. And also, we know that Chinese capitalist development is been relying on the very close collaboration between the US and China. For years, the Chinese capitalists have developed a very close working relationship with them, right? And they buy stuff in the New York City, a lot of buildings, I think they bought them. But as this Western countries run into crisis, economic, political crisis, it became convenient for their ruling classes become conservative and also increasingly incompetent. And they use China as a good scapegoat. All the problems are from China. And this rupture, I think, in the global order means that capitalism, either in China and abroad, would face a much more uncertain and hostile environment from now on. It's something that, regardless of what the personal opinion is, but it's something tougher for them, for all of them. I think all of those problems and challenges, internally, externally, leave the Chinese elites in a difficult position. Again, they may have different personal thoughts on this, but in practice, they have three choices. First, they can do a new shock therapy, like that which they didn't finish starting from the 80s and 90s. A new shock therapy to get rid of the remaining public assets, that get rid of Marxism from all the curriculum. They can get rid of the Communist Party. I think many people have thought about this. They intended to do this, but it's increasingly risky, and it's unlikely to be popular. So they have missed the momentum by the end of 1980s or early 1990s to do it. I mean, if they like Russia, they did it, right? But in China, if you didn't do it at that time, now it's impossible even to think about it. Second, they can just do business as usual. They pretend nothing was happening. But this would only deepen the contradictions and further destabilize the capitalist order. Or third, they can do more regulation. They can give more to the working class. They can really move forward to a progressive left direction. But the thing is that any meaningful reform could potentially threaten capitalism economically and politically. We have seen some of the reforms in the last few years, and the government has at least been giving more progressive, at least rhetorics in the last 2 years. So we have to see how far those reforms can go. But I think it's in a good progressive direction. But of course, I think capitalists over the world face deep contradictions. But in China, such problems are explicitly political and inherently revolutionary. Here in the United States or in many other countries, the problems are between this group or that group, this race and that race, this gender, that gender. Many of those struggles are meaningful, are useful, are progressive. But in China, the problem is whether you want capitalism or socialism, whether you want revolution or anti-revolution, that's much more explicit. There's no way around it. So I think that what is certain is that capitalism has passed its heyday, even in a, let's say, emerging market like China, like what the mainstream media likes to say. And the struggle around China and also within China will be a crucial piece in the ending of capitalism everywhere. So thank you.
It's really interesting. So I work in investing, and one of the things that we're thinking about right now is, like we invest heavily in China, and for the past couple months it's been quite volatile in terms of just the regulations. I'm interested in hearing maybe just like everyone, but specifically like what you think about, like if we're talking about the Chinese elite specifically and their role in society and the billions of dollars that they have lost at this point. It seems like Jack Ma is not really in the picture anymore, but then there's Tencent seems to be doing well, maybe not like stock-wise, but that they have other projects in like space and things like that with the government. What do you see the next 30 years going forward of how Xi Jinping is going to rebalance economic stability in this way? Because it seems like they've allowed capitalism to go too far, and now they're reining some money back in to focus on other things. But what does that mean for the tech giants, the big people that have kind of maybe gone too far, and what sort of evolution do you see going forward with that?
Anyone can take this question, or to, yeah, go ahead.
Thanks for the question. I think it's a question that we often ask these days, like how far this can go. There is a few things that we are pretty certain it will happen, because for the Chinese government, once it puts something in a platform, in the program, it will be realized in some way. So last year, when the Chinese central government published this 5-year plan, what it will do in the next 5 years, it clearly says that it aims to increase the share of labor in the national income distribution. And that is a very ambitious claim, because we know that if you increase the share of labor's compensation in national income, it almost certainly will decrease the rate of profit for capital. So in some way. And so it's all built in that program. How it will do it, we don't know yet. But it would necessarily involve some sort of a higher level of protection for workers, a better pay, or a better implemented after overtime payment, something like that, and which it's doing. So I think with that in mind, I think that the government, it's such a bold plan, because for years this labor share in national income has been declining, and only starting from 2008, 2010, it started to restoring a little bit. Now the government explicitly, first time, is going to increase. And this would mean that the government needs to have some power over the capitalist class, like you have to do this, do that. And maybe, I'm guessing, it's trying to choose a few that have gone too far, use you as a signal, like we are serious about this. And despite this, I think there's so many struggles around this thing that a lot of things are unclear. For example, when Xi Jinping gave a speech in August about common prosperity, if you look at the national mainstream news media, they talk about, oh yes, great, President Xi has been talking about this, it's so great, we're going to definitely do it, we're going to do it via so-called a third redistribution, which means philanthropy, which is definitely not what Xi Jinping was trying to say when he gave the speech. So even as this top one figure in the government gave this very important direction, the mainstream media, totally under him, would wrongly interpret, I think purposefully. I think it means how much struggle there is within the party, within the government. And part of the result was that the central government, they ordered all the mainstream media to publish a blogger's article across the platform. When that blogger is a center-left writer, is not like a prominent scholar or something, and it was total surprise. But it shows how much dissatisfaction that part of the central leadership has regarding this whole bureaucracy, all this collaboration, between capitalist class and part of the bureaucracy. So I think there's a lot of struggles that we're going to see. I'm not sure about the results.
Great, and I think Elias also wanted to respond. I saw you.